Okay, we're going to be finishing section 3 in the chapter on shamanism, chapter 6 in Joseph Campbell's Primitive Mythology. The main point that has been here so vividly illustrated is that in the phenomenology of mythology and religion, two factors are to be distinguished, the non-historical and the historical. In the religious lives of the tough-minded, too busy or simply untalented majority of mankind, the historical factor preponderates. The whole reach of their experience is in the local public domain and can be historically studied. In the spiritual crises and realizations of the tender-minded personalities with mystical proclivities, however, it is the non-historical factor that preponderates. And for them, the imagery of the local tradition, no matter how highly developed it may be, is merely a vehicle, more or less adequate to render an experience sprung from beyond its reach as an immediate impact. For in the final analysis, the religious experience is psychological and in the deepest sense spontaneous. It moves within and is helped or hindered by historical circumstance, but is to such a degree constant for mankind that we may jump from Hudson Bay to Australia, Tierra del Fuego to Lake Baikal and find ourselves well at home. In the present chapter on shamanism, that is to say, we are touching lightly the problem of the mystical experience, which is non-historical and yet, wherever it appears, gives sense and depth to whatever imagery may be cherished in the local tradition, cultivated by the local priests, and more or less crudely utilized for social ends, and a bit of spiritual comfort by the local populace. The shaman represents this principle on the primitive level, as do the mystic, the poet, and the artist in the higher reaches of the culture scale. I should like to suggest as a basic hypothesis, therefore, a correlation of the elementary idea with the mystical, and of the ethnic idea with the historical factors just described. The elementary idea is never rendered or experienced except through the medium of the ethnic, and so it looks as though mythology and religion could be studied and discussed on the historical plane. Actually, however, there is a formative force spontaneously working, like a magnetic field, to precipitate and organize the ethnic structures from behind or within so that they cannot finally be interpreted economically, sociologically, politically, or historically. Psychology lurks beneath and within the entire historical composition as an invisible controller. But on the other hand, all mythological imagery and ritual forms, both in their bearing on philosophy and in their impact on society, can and must be studied historically. As Professor Jensen has well said in his strongest criticism of a purely psychological approach to mythology, a myth is not a sequence of independent images, but a meaningful whole, in which a particular aspect of the actual world is reflected. In part 2 of the present study, the aspect represented to man's imagination by the model of death and birth afforded by the plant world was reviewed. In the remaining chapters of part 3, we consider the response to the aspect represented by the animal world. Within each of these contexts, men and women are linked to each other and to their world, engaged, that is to say, in the local ways of life. And the myths serve primarily a social end. However, in the phase of our subject we are now considering, shamanism and the techniques of ecstasy, the same symbols work for disengagement. The subjects of our present study may be summarized as follows. A. The non-historical, spontaneous factor of the shamanistic mystical rapture, released and rendered by way of 1. The imagery of the hunting societies, 2. The imagery of the primitive planters, 3. The imagery of the hieratic city-state. B. The historical conditioned and conditioning factor of the local, socially oriented tradition as represented in 1. The imagery of the hunting societies, 2. The imagery of the primitive planters, 3. The imagery of the hieratic city-state. Moreover, the basic form of the shamanistic crisis can be summarized as follows. A. A spontaneously precipitated rupture with the world of common day, revealed in symptoms analogous to those of a serious nervous breakdown, visions of dismemberment, fosterage in the world of the spirits, and restitution. B. A course of shamanistic mythological instruction under a master, through which an actual restitution of a superior level is achieved. C. A career of magical practice in the service of the community, defended from the natural resentment of the assisted community by various tricks and parodies of power. The healing of the shaman is achieved through art, i.e., mythology and song. When I begin to sing, said the shaman Semyon, my sickness usually disappeared. And the practice of the shaman also is by way of art, an imitation or presentation in the field of time and space of the visionary world of his spiritual seizure. A pole is placed in the center of the yurt with cleats by which he climbs, imitating the magical ascent of his soul, for the tree, as we are told, grows during the rite and invisibly reaches the summit of heaven. I remember how in the old days, said Alexiev Mikhail, an old Yakut dwelling near the Lena River, the shamans bellowed during the seance like bulls, and there would grow on their heads pure opaque horns. I once saw such a thing myself. There used to live in our village a shaman whose name was Konor. When his older sister died, he shamanized. When he did so, horns grew on his head. He stirred up the dry clay floor with them and ran about on all fours as children do when they play bull. He mooed loudly and bellowed like a bull. Every shaman, said another informant, Pavlov Kapitan, must have an animal mother or origin animal. It is usually pictured in the form of an elk, less often as a bear. This animal lives independently, separated from the shaman. Perhaps it can be best imagined as the fiery force of the shaman that flies over the earth. It is the embodiment of the prophetic gift of the shaman, adds G.V. Xenophantov. It is the shaman's visionary power, which is able to penetrate both the past and the future. The shaman furthermore has bird and animal familiars who assist him in his task. The shamans tell us, said Samsonov Spiridon, that they have two dogs who are their invisible assistants. In the seance they call them by their names, Chardas and Botas, the dogs of the bloodthirsty shaman possessed by evil spirits will kill cattle and people, grown-up people. However, they do not kill. It is also said, this informant continued, that some shamans have a bear and a wolf, and that these appear at seances. But not all who would like to practice the shaman's art can do so. Danilov Pyotr described an attempt that gently failed. In the Bertun area, there was a man 2 summers ago who said that he was soon to become a shaman. He ordered a hut built for himself in a clearing in the neighborhood. The little house was placed right against the tallest larch, and on this there were a lot of shamanistic idols that had been hung there after seances. Young unmarried boys had to build the hut of unpeeled branches, according to his instructions. The man's name was Mikhail Satvich Nitikin, and he was about 40 years old. When the hut that he had built was finished, he went into it and remained 3 days. He had said, I am to lie there like a dead man for 3 days and shall be cut to pieces. On the 3rd day I shall rise again. For the day of his resurrection, he had ordered a shaman to be brought by the name of Batshuka, the son of Topin, who should perform over him the ceremony of the lifting up of the body and instructive ordination. And they say also that a man named Dmitri Saba Uktur was with him as an attendant. Well, when the shaman who had been summoned arrived, a lot of people gathered around the hut to watch the ceremony, and I joined them. The shaman had come with his drum, and the candidate had donned his shaman costume. I was close enough to hear the ordaining shaman, when he had summoned his spirits, given them praise, and asked them for help. "It is midsummer," he said, "when the leaves and blades of the trees and grasses have already come out. One should not perform the ordination of a shaman. The right times for that are spring and fall." And with that he broke off the ceremony. The other shamanizes to this day in a half-baked way. He does so without wearing a shaman costume, performs only the preliminary summonses, and can take into himself only minor illnesses. "It is said," declared Alexey Ivan, "that the really good shamans are cut up 3 times in their life, the poor only once. The spirit of an exceptional shaman is born again after his death. They say that great shamans are reborn 3 times." Okay, that's the end of section 3 in shamanism, chapter on shamanism. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the end of that section.